They said the fire started in the kitchen, but I know better. It began the night Master Thompson married me, not out of love, but laughter. They wagered whiskey and pride, and I became the prize, a fat cook chained to his humiliation. I remember the smell of burnt sugar, the laughter echoing through the halls, and the promise I whispered under my breath. Before this year ends, this house will burn and I'll be free. I remember that house like a wound that never healed. White pillars rising from red dirt, magnolia trees bleeding their scent into the air, and windows that seemed to watch you even when you weren't looking back. They called it Thompson Manor, but to us, the ones who worked, bled, and starved beneath its shadow, it was the mouth. It swallowed lives, chewed them down to bone, and spat out nothing but silence. My name was Clara May once, before chains rubbed it down to cook. Every dawn, I fed that house, biscuits, bacon, hope, and every night it fed on me. My hands knew more about heat than any sermon could teach. But no fire burned hotter than the shame of being chosen for his bet. It was Christmas Eve, 1854. The master and his men had been drinking since noon, their laughter louder than the church bells across the river. I heard them, from the kitchen, arguing about beauty, blood, and obedience. Then one of them, drunk and cruel, said, "Bet you won't marry that big cook of yours, Thomas. You don't got the stomach for that." And he did. He did, just to prove he could. They dragged me out before the guests. The room stank of tobacco and brandy. He stood there, red-faced and grinning, saying words I barely heard through the ringing in my ears. "Do you take this man?" The preacher mumbled, but I wasn't listening. I was watching the chandelier tremble, tiny crystals shaking like my hands. The laughter that followed was the kind that breaks something inside you. When he kissed me, the room howled. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't marriage. It was a performance. And I was the joke. But the joke would not last. Not once. I learned how fragile the powerful really were, how their arrogance was paper thin, how fear smelled like whiskey and sweat. The first night in his bed was the night I began to plan. He slept like a man with no soul, mouth open, snores rattling like thunder. I watched him, and I whispered the same words over and over till dawn. Fire don't just destroy, it purifies. Because deep down, I already knew. The kitchen that had built their comfort would be the same place that ended it. And when the embers came, they'd know it was the cook who lit them. Morning came heavy after that wedding night. The sky above the plantation hung low, swollen with clouds the color of old bruises. I rose before the rooster, as I always did, and went straight to the kitchen. They had already started calling me Mrs. Thompson, but never without a laugh tucked behind the name. Even the field hands avoided my eyes. They didn't know whether to pity me or fear what I might do. The kitchen was my kingdom, my cage, and my confessional. Iron pots hung like shadows, and smoke clung to the rafters thick as guilt. The walls remembered every cry ever swallowed there, the scalded hands, the whip marks, the prayers whispered into boiling water. I stirred the pots as the others came in, their chains clinking softly like wind chimes from hell. Christmas morning meant a feast. And a feast meant I had to cook for the same men who had laughed at me the night before. Whole hams glistened, sweet potatoes bubbled with sugar, and the smell of roasted duck filled the air. I seasoned everything by touch, salt, spice, and rage. Every flick of my wrist carried a thought I dared not speak. One day, this table will feed on you instead. When the guests arrived, I stayed in the shadows, watching through the kitchen door. Master Thomas raised his glass, slurring through a speech about new beginnings. His friends roared in delight, the sound rolling through the house like thunder over a graveyard. He looked at me once, just once, and the smirk on his lips said it all. "You'll never forget who owns you, not even now." But ownership is a fragile thing when a heart starts to rot. I could feel it, the edges of my patience crumbling like old bread. That night, when the last dish was cleared and the candles burned low, I stayed behind. The others went to the quarters, leaving me alone with the ashes. I walked through the empty hall, barefoot, the wooden floor cool under my feet. The portraits stared down from the walls, smug, painted ghosts of men who thought they'd live forever. I stopped beneath his grandfather's portrait, my reflection flickering in the glass. "I ain't yours," I whispered. "Not anymore. Not even if you bury me under this floor." In the scullery, I found the jar, the one that held lye for cleaning. It sat on a high shelf, half hidden behind flour sacks. I held it, feeling its weight, its promise. Not yet, I thought. Not tonight. But soon. When I returned to my quarters, the air was thick with the sound of rain and chain links. The others were asleep, but one old woman stirred. She looked at me, eyes cloudy and tired, and murmured, "Fire walkin' in your eyes, Clara May. Don't let it burn you first." I didn't answer. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, because the fire she saw had already started. And once a woman's heart catches flame, there's no putting it out. They said the mistress had a smile like silk, soft, shining, but sharp enough to cut. Her name was Eleanor Thompson, and before my forced marriage, she had ruled this house like a queen wrapped in lace. When her husband married me, the fat cook, the slave, the joke, something inside her snapped like a string pulled too tight. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply began to play a quieter, deadlier game. She stopped eating the food I made. She stopped speaking to her husband, too. But her eyes never stopped burning holes into me. When I passed her in the hall, she'd lower her voice and whisper, "I hope you choke on your own grease, girl." And she'd smile that thin smile again, like she already knew how this story would end. It wasn't just hate. It was humiliation. She couldn't bear that her husband had touched one of us, even as a cruel bet. Every time she saw me, she saw his shame, and she wanted me to pay for it. Soon, the punishments began. Small at first. My rations cut. My sleeping cot soaked with cold water. Tasks doubled. "Let's see how a wife cooks," she'd sneer, watching as I stirred pots till my arms trembled. Sometimes she'd order me to stand in the dining hall, silent, while she and her guests dined, forcing me to listen as she mocked me, called me a thing, beast. The master said nothing. He'd just sit there, red-eyed and half-drunk, pretending not to hear. Cowardice wears fine clothes, I learned that year. He'd rather drown in whiskey than face the woman he'd ruined, both of us. But hate has a way of ripening, like spoiled fruit. The more she tormented me, the clearer my purpose became. At night, in the kitchen, I'd feel the house shifting, creaking under secrets too heavy to hold. Sometimes I swore I heard voices in the walls, whispering my name. Sometimes I whispered back. There was a night, late in February, when Eleanor came down herself. The candles burned low, shadows long across the floor. She stood there in her nightgown, pale as bone, and said, "You think he loves you? You think this house belongs to you now?" I didn't answer. Her hand came fast, a slap that split my lip and left a taste of blood. She leaned in close, her perfume sickly sweet. "Remember your place," she hissed. Then she turned to leave, but her gown brushed the edge of the stove, catching a spark. For one heartbeat, the flame kissed her lace hem. I could have slapped it out. I could have saved her. But I didn't move. I just watched the spark fade. Because in that tiny flash of orange, I saw the future, and it looked a lot like fire. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't just him who'd chained me. It was her. It was them. And the only way to be free was to make them all burn together. The kitchen was never silent after midnight. Even when the fire died down and the last candle bled its light into the floor, the air still moved, soft, whispering, alive. Some said the house settled with the night. I knew better. The house remembered. That's when I began hearing them. At first, I thought it was the wind pushing through the cracks. Then I realized the wind didn't call my name. "Clara May," the voice came from the hearth one night while I scrubbed the last pan. I froze, breath caught halfway to my chest. It wasn't frightening. It was familiar, like the sound of a prayer I'd forgotten how to say. I whispered back, "Who's there?" And the fire answered with a pop, a spark, and a faint smell of rosemary and ash. It was the same scent I used in the master's stew. From that night on, I stopped fearing the house. I started listening to it. Every night, the whispers grew stronger, women's voices, some low and broken, others soft and trembling. They spoke of suffering, of beatings, of sons torn away and daughters buried under the magnolia trees. But beneath the sorrow, there was something else, a rhythm, a pattern, a recipe. Not for food, for vengeance. I began to gather things quietly. A sprig of nightshade that grew by the well, a pinch of lye from the scullery, and something the mistress herself had gifted me without knowing, her hair, caught in the comb she threw at me during one of her tantrums. I hid them under the loose brick behind the stove. Every time I passed that spot, I felt warmth, as though the house approved. By day, I kept my head low, my mouth shut. The master grew meaner, the mistress colder. Their marriage rotted like meat in summer. They no longer looked at each other, but both looked at me. He, with guilt he tried to drown. She, with envy she couldn't swallow. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching him through the window as he spoke to me in the yard. Once, she threw a silver bowl against the wall. It shattered like a scream that never left her throat. That night, she sent for me and made me serve her alone. When I poured her wine, her hand trembled. "You think you've won," she whispered. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I hadn't won yet. But I would. The voices in the kitchen started to hum when she left, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat under the floor. They weren't haunting me anymore. They were helping me, teaching me, guiding me. Fire cleans, they said. Poison ends. Choose what they fear most. And I knew then I wouldn't have to choose, because before the end, they would know both. So I prayed that night, not to God, but to the flames. And when I closed my eyes, I saw the house burning, glowing like judgment. I saw the mistress screaming, the master begging. And I saw myself, calm, smiling, free. The whispers faded with the dawn. But I carried their promise in my chest, because the kitchen was no longer my prison. It was my altar. The south was thick with heat that June, the air so heavy it made the curtains sweat. By then, months had passed since the wedding that wasn't a wedding. The laughter had faded, the whispers had grown, and the voices in the walls had taught me everything I needed to know. The mistress had decided to host a summer feast, to show the neighbors that her marriage still stood, that shame could be dressed up in lace and music. She wanted beauty and perfection, and I gave her both. From dawn, I worked like a woman possessed. The kitchen pulsed with motion, knives chopping, spoons stirring, fire roaring in the hearth. I seasoned the duck with thyme, glazed the ham with honey, baked cornbread golden as sunlight. And in the sweet potato pie, I added a pinch of something darker. The jar sat behind the flour tin, its contents gray and harmless looking. A mixture the whispers had taught me, a drop from the lye, a touch of nightshade, and something they called mercy. I stirred it in slow, whispering my own prayer. Let them taste what we lived. By noon, the house glittered with false joy. Guests arrived in their best, lace gloves, pressed suits, smiles like polished silver. The master greeted them with trembling hands, the mistress with her porcelain mask. I moved through it all unseen, the silent servant, the invisible wife. But in my heart, I was the conductor of this symphony of doom. When they sat to eat, I stood by the doorway. The air buzzed with laughter, forks clinking, glasses raised. And for the first time, the mistress smiled at me, not with hatred, but triumph. She thought she had won. She lifted her fork and took the first bite of pie. The master followed, then the guests, and I watched. At first, nothing, just talk, laughter, music. Then the first cough, light, awkward, swallowed by noise. Another followed, then another. A woman's hand trembled. A man dropped his fork. Someone's laughter cut short into a gag. The room began to shift, the smell of perfume turning sour with sweat and fear. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. And through it all, I stood still, hands folded before me, calm as Sunday prayer. The mistress's face went pale. She reached for the table, gasping. Her eyes met mine, wide, desperate, begging. I took a step forward, almost tender, and whispered, "Eat, Miss Eleanor. Eat like you made me eat my shame." The master staggered to his feet, clutching his stomach. "Clara, what did you?" But he never finished the question. He fell, face first, into the feast he had demanded. And as the screams filled the hall, I heard it, the whispers turning into laughter. Soft at first, then louder, circling me like a storm. The candles flickered. The air grew colder. And somewhere deep in the house, the fire began to hum. The nightshade had done its work, but my vengeance was not yet complete, because the house itself was still hungry. It started with a sound, a deep, low hum that rose through the floorboards like a heartbeat waking from its grave. The guests were still screaming, stumbling over each other, choking, gasping. But beneath it all, I heard the house begin to breathe. The fire in the kitchen hearth flared, stretching tall as a man, then bending, bowing, as if listening. And I knew it was time. I walked down the corridor, my bare feet leaving prints in spilled wine and blood. The chandeliers rattled. The portraits on the walls tilted, as though the painted ancestors themselves leaned forward to watch. Every creak of the floorboards felt like applause. Behind me, the mistress still gasped for air, crawling toward the parlor doors. Her white gown dragged through the crimson mess. "Help me," she whispered. I turned to her, and for a heartbeat, I saw not the monster who'd mocked and beaten me, but a woman broken by the same man, the same house, the same chains. For a moment, mercy flickered. But then the whisper came. No mercy for the keepers of cages. The candle in my hand burned steady, its flame dancing with purpose. I dropped it onto the rug. The fire caught fast, licking up the drapes, climbing the walls, devouring the room with hunger centuries old. Smoke rolled thick and black. The air crackled. Somewhere upstairs, the master screamed my name, not with anger this time, but terror. He tried to run, but the hallway collapsed in a roar of flame. I stood in the center of it all, my dress glowing with embers, my breath shallow but steady. Every breath of smoke filled me with something fierce, holy. It wasn't death that came for me that night. It was freedom. The whispers rose again, hundreds now, thousands, women's voices, men's cries, children's laughter. They poured from the walls, from the floor, from the fire itself. They weren't whispering anymore. They were singing. They sang my name. Clara May, Clara May. I raised my hands as the ceiling began to fall. The flames reached for me like arms pulling me home. I didn't run, didn't scream, didn't pray. I just smiled, because the house that had swallowed so many souls was finally choking on mine. The last thing I remember was the sound, not the screaming, not the fire's roar, but the singing. It was soft, almost tender, wrapping around me like a lullaby. Then everything turned to light. When the sun rose, Thompson Manor was gone. Ashes, smoke, silence, but not peace. Because some nights, when the wind blows across the river, they say the fire still sings. And if you listen close, you'll hear a woman's voice whispering through the embers. "I told you the house would burn and I'd be free." They didn't find me in the ruins. They said the fire burned too hot, too long, that nothing human could have survived it. But I did, not in flesh, but in something deeper, older. When the townsfolk came the next morning, the manor was a blackened skeleton against the dawn. Smoke still coiled from the earth like ghostly fingers reaching for the sky. The magnolia trees had wilted. The air was heavy with ash and silence. They found the mistress first, or what was left of her. Her body lay near the parlor door, face half buried in soot, her hands still clutching a silver cross that hadn't saved her. The master was found near the stairs, frozen mid-crawl, eyes open, mouth full of smoke. They said it looked like he was trying to beg. Nobody spoke of me, not out loud, but I heard their whispers anyway. They said I'd cursed them, that I'd sold my soul to something wicked, that the fire was no accident, that the devil himself had come to supper. Maybe they were right. Or maybe the devil had just been living there all along, in their laughter, their cruelty, their bets. I only lit the match. They buried the Thompsons on the edge of the property, side by side, as if death could mend what life had broken. No one built on that land again. The ashes stayed untouched, the soil scorched. Even the grass refused to grow. Years passed. Seasons turned. The world changed, but that land never healed. Sometimes, travelers said they saw a figure in the ruins, a woman in a soot-stained dress, standing where the kitchen once stood. Others swore they smelled baking bread, or heard the faint clang of pots long after midnight. A few claimed they saw the firelight flicker in the distance, though no home remained to hold it. One man, a preacher, tried to hold service there once. He said he wanted to cleanse the evil. He made it as far as the old well before he ran back to town, shaking like a leaf. Said he heard a woman singing an old hymn, soft and low, right behind his ear. Said the voice smelled like smoke. I don't mean to haunt them. I only remember the way they laughed, the way they hurt, the way the chains felt, heavy, hot, alive. Sometimes, when the night is still, I walk the ruins. I touch the cracked earth, the bones of the house that held my pain. And I wonder, did I set myself free, or did I just trade one prison for another? The whispers are quieter now. The others, the ones who suffered, they've moved on. But me? I stay. Because the fire that freed me also bound me here, and the chains that once clinked on my wrists now rattle in the wind, calling my name. Sometimes, I wonder if the South still remembers me. Not my name, that's long been lost to ash and rumor, but the sound of my footsteps echoing through their history. They built new homes miles away from the old plantation. Brick walls, white fences, polished floors, clean, respectable. But you can't bury smoke. It seeps into the roots, into the rivers, into the songs they still hum when they think no one's listening. I've walked through those empty fields for over 100 years now. The moonlight paints the ruins silver, and the air hums with memory. Each gust of wind still carries voices, the cries, the hymns, the laughter that used to fill the night before it all turned to fire. I see them sometimes, silhouettes of men with hats and women with aprons, their faces blurred by time. They walk beside me but never see me. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe that's punishment. I still hear the piano sometimes, the one the mistress used to play after supper. The melody floats through the air, faint and trembling, like the ghost of a lullaby. And when it fades, the silence feels heavier than chains. People say ghosts linger because of unfinished business. But what if the business isn't unfinished, just unforgettable? I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for peace, but peace never came. What came instead was fire, and a legend whispered across generations. They tell it to scare children now about the slave woman who burned her master's house for love or hate or both. They twist it into a tale fit for campfires and whiskey nights. But they never tell it right. They never say how it smelled, like oil and rain and blood. They never say how my heart trembled as I struck the match, or how, for one fleeting second, I thought I saw the stars blink in approval. Sometimes I wonder if I hadn't lit that fire, would anyone have remembered me at all? I walk the same soil still, watching generations rise and fall, their lives built upon the bones of the forgotten. Some nights, when a storm rolls in, I hear the chains clatter in the distance, and I know I am not the only one who remembers. They say time heals everything, but time never stepped foot on a plantation. It never felt the whip, or smelled burning flesh, or heard a child's scream echo against wood and stone. Time doesn't heal, it hides, and I am what it hid. So if you ever find yourself driving through the South on a humid night, and you pass a field where the air feels too heavy, roll down your window. Listen. You might hear a woman humming softly in the dark, a lullaby older than the country itself. Follow the sound, and you'll see a faint orange glow in the distance, a light that never dies. That's me, Clara May. The cook, the bride, the ghost, still standing where the house once burned, still waiting for the fire to finish what it started, because the house may be gone, but it still breathes through me.